focus of this visit is going to be on the trade and economic question. We have our reporters first. I want to go across to Siddhant Mishra, who is joining us live from outside Hyderabad House. Arun Dhanta is joining us from outside the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where there will be a ceremonial welcome this morning, and later tonight the state banquet for the visiting dignitary. And Akanksha Swaroop is joining us from the Bharat Mandapam, where of course later this afternoon there will be the CEO's roundtable. Siddhant, let me start with you first. What can we expect? Of course, one of the pillars of this relationship has been on defense cooperation. Talk to us about that, and also the desire by both sides to want to expand the realm and the breadth of the trade and economic cooperation.
Well, that's right, Zaka. In fact, yesterday President Putin was at 7 LKM. In fact, he was there for about 3 hours. Both leaders held private meeting. It was only President Putin and Prime Minister Modi accompanied by interpreters. Today is a day for 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. Now, this visit of President Putin is to boost the bilateral relationship with Russia. Definitely both leaders will be exchanging views on regional and global issues, but the focus would be to increase economic cooperation, more investments, more trade. So the biggest takeaway, Zaka, would be the mobility agreement. This pact is being negotiated from last 1 year, and it is finalized now. Today it will be signed in presence of two leaders. Then trade deficit. So Russian side also understands India's concern. Both the business delegations from both sides have been meeting from last 24 hours to find out a plan to reduce the trade deficit. Fertilizer is again going to be one key focus area, because India wants the buyer-seller relationship to be going beyond the buyer-seller relationship, and it should be more of co-productions, etc. So in that domain also we could expect some announcement. Then Russia is interested in more Indian products, pharmaceuticals, marine products, etc. So there could also be some agreement on that, which will be a part of the official document after the delegation level talks at the Hyderabad House, Zaka.
Okay,
so
let me also go across to Arun Dhanta, who's joining us from just at Raisina Hill. And you know, the official engagements begin with the ceremonial reception that happens for the visiting dignitary, the visiting head of state. That's going to happen at the Rashtrapati Bhavan forecourt. And then, of course, later tonight, there's going to be the state banquet, the state dinner for Vladimir Putin. Walk us through what's on the schedule, what's on the engagement list for both the Prime Minister and the President today, Arun.
Well, that's right, Zaka. This visit of Vladimir Putin is going to be high on optics and, of course, the pageantry associated with the state visit. And right now I am at the Kartavya Path, and that's the route which Vladimir Putin is going to take. Let me quickly show you a glimpse that how things have completely changed here. You can see security paraphernalia everywhere in that area. Remember, this is the Kartavya Path which will lead you towards the Raisina Hills, and then of course going through the North Block and South Block, entering into the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So this is the route which Vladimir Putin is going to take. Zaka, 11 a.m. is the time when that Rashtrapati Bhavan ceremonial welcome will happen for the Putin, and that will mark the official beginning of his state visit. Tri-Services Guard, as we've been discussing about this, that Army, Air Force, Navy contingent will be present there in the forecourts of the Rashtrapati Bhavan, and of course they will be standing in the honor of the President of Russia, and that will signify the importance of this visit and the importance of Vladimir Putin in India. As India have been saying, Prime Minister Modi has been saying this, that Russia is our all-weather friend, and in reciprocation we've seen Putin is calling Modi and India a great friend. But we've been discussing about of course the bilateral meeting. We've been also discussing about this, that how European Union and United States will be watching the developments here very keenly, and both India and Russia will be wary of this fact that what's going to be on their agenda and what's going to be the outcome and what's going to be the implication of that. And also interesting fact, Zaka, in 2000 when Vladimir Putin had come to India, even that point in time, situation was very much similar. We had a acrimonious relationship with Pakistan after Kargil war, and of course the IC-814 hijacking, and also of course we had sanctions from the west side at that time after Pokhran 2 nuclear test. Similarly, this time around we have extra tariff from the United States time. So there are similarity in that 2000 visit of Putin and when he's visiting in 2025.
Okay, in fact, it was in 2000 that the first India-Russia annual summit got instituted. Putin is now here in India for the 23rd edition of the India-Russia Annual Summit. I also want to go across to Akanksha Swaroop, who's there at the Bharat Mandapam. Later this afternoon, both the President and the Prime Minister will be convening the India-Russia CEOs Roundtable, the Business Forum. And as I outlined a moment ago, one of the things that they want to expand is on trade and cooperation, on expanding the breadth of the trade relationship. Right now, a lot of it is Russian gas and oil, and the trade deficit, like I outlined a moment ago, is the second highest that India has with any country after China. How do they plan to go about it?
Right. So very interestingly, we are at the Bharat Mandapam where the CEO roundtable will be happening. And yesterday was the India-Russia Business Forum. Interestingly, Zaka, the Commerce Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, was very quick in pointing out that the trade has been flourishing between India and Russia. Nonetheless, it remains skewed, and that trade basket has to be diversified. So even though India happens to be one of the largest buyers of Russian defense, also was one of the largest buyers of Russian oil, and that of course has been going down. So it is now going to shift focus over to trade. What is that going to encompass? You're looking at pharmaceuticals, you're looking at fertilizers, agricultural products. Both the sides are looking towards working down, say, the tariff barriers. The Commerce Minister also highlighted that compliance, tariff, and there was a lot of red tapeism involved, which the Modi government has sort of worked towards to reduce, and that will also give a headway in sort of strengthening and deepening this partnership. All of the Russian delegation currently is comprising of, say, corporate honchos from these sectors, which I just enlisted, many of them also belonging to the energy sector, many of them belonging to big machinery sectors as well. The other aspect that we are looking towards is increasing labor mobility. Remember, Russia has lost out close to 1 million Russians on the front line alone, and there is a massive labor shortage. India is looking towards replenishing that shortage by providing Indian labor. At the same time, nuclear cooperation is going to be another major area of sort of concern and cooperation. But it would be interesting to see how we take this entire bilateral trade partnership forward. We've been talking to, say, FICCI also, members of FICCI. They've all been talking about how this particular forum is only going to help us take this forward.
Okay, we'll be back in touch with our reporters through the course of the morning. It's going to be a busy and heavy morning for our reporters as well, so I hope you've got your fuel for the day. We're getting a piece of breaking news, and this is an important one. One of the areas that they want to expand on, and you will get an announcement of this later in the afternoon, is around small modular reactors. Russia's state-run nuclear corporation, Rosatom, has now announced that it has delivered the first consignment of nuclear fuel for the initial loading of Unit 3 at the Kudankulam nuclear power plant in Tamil Nadu. The fuel delivery marks a key milestone in the ongoing construction and commissioning of the plant's next reactor unit. There are 6 units that the Russian side was supposed to build. 2 of them are operational now. This is the nuclear fuel that's been now confirmed. For the 3rd unit, there are now units 4, 5 and 6 that need to be commissioned as well. So this is something that you will hear about when those intergovernmental agreements are signed later this afternoon. Here in our studios, Lieutenant General D.P. Pandey, security analyst, is there. We have Abhijit Iyer Mitra, senior fellow from the Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies, and Anand Raghunathan, professor and familiar face here on CNN News 18. Welcome, gentlemen. General Pandey, what is at stake as you see it, as President Putin and Prime Minister Modi begin the 23rd Annual India-Russia Summit at a time when there seems to be this geopolitical rebalancing going on?
Yeah, I think firstly, a lot of people are putting focus on defense deal and trade facet, how to overcome, bridge the gap of trade gap and all, but I look at it in this whole shifting of geopolitics in not only in the region, but more importantly in the world stage. I think a multipolarity is now getting established by this visit of the 10th visit of Putin in since the time he has been in the power. I think it's very, very important and significant. And I think for both, not only for Putin. A lot of people are saying it's important for Putin to showcase to his own population, his own people, and to the world that he is not isolated in this whole context, which is war which is happening with Ukraine, while Europeans and the Americans may be getting after him by sanctioning and all. But yet he has got places to visit. He's already been visiting in last couple of months. He's been out of his country and visited a number of states, and therefore I think it's very important for him domestically, but I think it's also very important for us. While we may not talk of it more often, that there is a leverage. We are an emerging power. If you look at this articles coming out by diplomats against the visit of Putin in our country and the discussion which is happening, why is he visiting our country, puts India back into the focus. So while number of people may feel that it is not so good, but I look at it that it's very important that India's relevance is being recognized in the world. And then my view is that this is a very great opportunity for Prime Minister Modi to come out slightly more higher when he may talk and make a mention about Ukraine-Russia war, away from the symbolism of sanctions and tariff and stuff like that, which has been tried to be imposed by the West on the rest of the world, actually, whosoever is taking energy connect from Russia. I think the moment he makes a statement on Ukraine-Russia war, because today we are the only country who can talk to both Ukrainians and Russians. And I think that is very important. And you listen to the statement when Putin comes out, when he's taking off, and he says, if the Europeans want war, there is hardly anybody who's left to talk to. So therefore, I think in this whole symbolism, the prowess or the presence of India in the geopolitical landscape is very, very important.
But Abhijit Mitra, it also comes at a time when obviously Trump has sort of put the oil tariffs on India. India is the only country with the oil tariffs. Is India also signaling to Trump and to Western capitals that, look, we have options and partners beyond just the West?
We've always been this sort of, even though we discarded non-alignment and things like that, we've always continued non-alignment in different forms. Now, our interests have never changed since the 1940s, which is we can never allow Russia and China to ever get together. Nehru tried it in his own way. It was badly executed. I think what we're seeing is the same policy, but very well executed this time. So remember, even when Trump imposed sanctions on us, he never talked about our defense. He only talked about purchasing oil from Russia, never about our defense relationship with Russia, never about, our foreign policy alignment with Russia and things like that. In fact, he wants to do what we did, which is, split the duo apart and use Russia as number two, a reverse Kissinger, if you want to call it that. So that is an extremely important part of this policy. I think the more Russia gets isolated and dependent on a Chinese energy monopsony, because India is not an industrial power, we can't buy the quantities of Russian commodities, both oil and gas, but also, regular commodities that China does. So he has to play a different game, and the more Russia felt isolated, the more they needed India. You will see how this has progressed. So for example, if you notice during Victory Day parades and things like that, he generally showed a great deal more proximity and affection for Xi Jinping than he ever did for an Indian leader. That's changed very significantly. This going around in the car and things like that. Yeah. It's a very clear message that things have changed. If you note, you'll also notice the change in Russian official propaganda. Russia today, till the Ukraine invasion, was a vitriolically anti-India channel that was almost indistinguishable from, say, Turkish radio, TV and Al Jazeera. The tune has completely changed, and yesterday apparently they opened their offices and did their inaugural broadcast.
So today I think he's going to inaugurate RT India.
Yeah.
That's one of the
things. Basically, as I see it, all three, America, India and Russia, are on board. It's a question of how well you calibrate and execute the policy.
So, Professor Anand Ranganathan, some would also say that what choice has Trump left India with? I mean, once the oil tariffs were imposed, it's not like India asked for it. As I said, India is the only country that's been singled out for those oil tariffs, even though China imports a hell of a lot more oil than India does. But this point that Abhijit made is well taken, that the last thing India wants is a coming together of Russia and China. And if that means, you have to roll out the red carpet for Putin, you have to, buy a lot more Russian fertilizer, send Indian folks to work in Russia, so on and so forth, then so be it. Because the moment there is this Soviet-Sino alignment, as we saw back in the day, that's a problem for India, and that's a problem for America as well.
Good morning, Zaka, and good morning to my fellow panelists, both of whom are experts. So I speak here purely in my laymanish capacity.
You're hardly a layman.
Learning all the time. 3 or 4 things that come to my mind. I think one is there is nothing that couldn't have been achieved without Putin coming here. Let's be very honest in today's world. But this is one of the most important meetings. Physical appearance of Putin was important for both countries. Earlier India was always looking at these big foreign leaders or superpowers, when would they come, or they would always hyphenate between India and Pakistan. Clinton did it and so many others did it. Now they need India, they need to project the association as much as we do, perhaps more. In that sense, I think this is the optics of this visit I'm putting much higher than what would be achieved on paper. Of course, Russia is a trusted friend. Of course, instead of the FTA that we are signing left and right with every country, we have what is called the Eurasian Economic Union, and we're trying to have an FTA with that.
But why do you say the optics will be more than the substance?
Because for Trump, he sees what he believes, and he wants to bully every other country into doing that. This is our opportunity to make him believe what he sees. And I think it's very important for 2 reasons. First of all, I completely echo what General Pandey said. It's ridiculous that the ambassadors of, all these Western powers in India are writing all these articles. Ambassador Sibbal also expressed this thing. I mean, they are free to express, but look at the hypocrisy. First, they are buying more Russian energy and oil than India. Yeah. We get slapped with tariffs, they don't. And then because we continue to buy, because we were having the price cap issue and we were evading that, America slaps sanctions on the 2 Russian oil majors, basically nipping the purchase in the bud. And then what do these ambassadors of the countries who are writing all these articles, of course, through directions from above, they get sanctions from the sanctions lifted or obeyed from America. I mean, Germany and UK.
Yeah.
And they're still writing this. So, they can take a walk. And I'm being very polite because I leave all the tough language to my good friend Abhijit, who's sitting on my... he has a way with words which most of us don't. But the fact of the matter is, Russia has always been a friend. And I can talk of science and technology cooperation as we move along, but I think the big picture is this is an image exercise that Putin and Modi both need.
I also want to go across to Angie Wong, who's a Republican strategist. She's joining us from Miami in Florida. Obviously, I mean, all of this comes in the backdrop of the ongoing Ukraine war. There doesn't seem to be an end in sight to that war. Just this week, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner were at the Kremlin. They had a 5-hour meeting with Vladimir Putin. And it doesn't seem like, there's any breakthrough on the anvil. So the question is, clearly Mr. Trump will be watching all of these developments. He imposed these oil tariffs in India. That has not, stopped India from buying Russian oil. He's imposed all kinds of sanctions on Russian companies. Russia's not stopping this war. Where does that leave Trump? Will he now sort of go in and sort of recalibrate the positions that he's taken and say, okay, what will it take to A, end the war, and B, for India to stop buying Russian oil? Because clearly whatever he's done so far is not working.
Yeah, at some point, the Trump administration needs to understand that Putin doesn't have to stop the war with Ukraine. And I think he's starting to get a sense of that. There's been several rounds, 3 that I have counted, where the Trump administration has reached out to Putin to end the Ukraine war. And just last weekend, Marco Rubio and other senior Trump officials met with Zelensky's delegation. They had productive talks here in Miami. But when that message then gets back to Russia and was conveyed to Putin, the talks went nowhere. So again, this is the 4th round, and it keeps going round and round circles. It doesn't seem like there's any end To my mind, I don't see it happening. I think Putin is certainly looking to buy time. Putin certainly does not want to be bullied by President Trump or Europe. And that's what these talks and this meeting, these 2 days meetings between Putin and Modi, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for signals of what Putin is doing here. And every signal that we've seen early on from this visit tells me that Putin wants to continue to fight in the Ukraine war by opening up new shipping channels with India that bypasses Europe, for example, and goes through Japan, for example. So they're looking at ways of bypassing their adversaries, meaning Putin's adversaries, and as your panelist had just said, looking to stick it to Trump. Trump is watching this very, very closely, watching for any sort of signals of what Putin might be doing next.
Abhijit, the only problem there is Trump wants the Nobel Peace Prize, and this is the only outstanding war. I mean, if he can't foster a peace, then he doesn't get the prize.
Well, he can win the prize different ways, right? I mean, he doesn't have to solve every single world war. He's already done phase 1 with the Gaza conflict. So
increased defense purchases are likely to attract adverse attention of President Trump. There is also talk in the U.S. media about CAATSA sanctions, which were waived for India when India first went in for the S-400 missile anti-defense system. There are risks in the relationship. But these risks have to be taken because President Trump is mounting so much pressure on India that certainly it puts us in great discomfort.
Right. Mr. Rubin, let me just bring you in there as well. We are also somewhat seeing a sort of geopolitical realignment here. Would you say that's true?
I would say, certainly India is keeping its geopolitical options open. But all I'm saying, and I share the frustration of the ambassador, is Donald Trump has a 35% approval rating. That means he has a 65% disapproval rating in the United States, and it's not clear he's going to be able to finish his term. What I would lament is after 25 years of building up U.S. India ties, if out of animosity towards President Trump, who is a limited factor, we actually set our relationship down a path of non-cooperation for decades to come. Prime Minister Nehru and President Truman weren't able to come to accord, and that pushed the United States into this alliance with Pakistan. Now, where I actually disagree with the ambassador is that no one understands what Donald Trump sees in Pakistan. Pakistan is a terror state. It's a failed state. And perhaps Donald Trump was bribed. Perhaps something else is going on. But ultimately, this is where India can rely on Congress. And India should be calling people like President George W. Bush and Barack Obama, both of whom were instrumental in building up the relationship, to come to New Delhi and to show Indians that Donald Trump doesn't represent all Americans. He's an anomaly. He's not the permanent face of the United States.
Mr. Rubin, you rightly said Donald Trump is a limited factor here, and India understands that very well as well. When we talk about the relationship between India and Russia, there's historical and cultural context to that also. That being said, are you hoping for any major breakthroughs during this visit of the Russian president to India? What would you be looking out for?
What would be very nice would be if Prime Minister Modi would assume the rightful place of India on the world stage and perhaps use his good offices to mediate between Russia and Ukraine in a much better way than someone like Donald Trump is capable of doing. India really underperforms on the world stage diplomatically, and I lament that because India could be doing far more if it realized just how positive its reputation was and how it can bring so many disparate states together, the United States and Iran, Russia and Ukraine, and so on and so on and so forth.
All right, noted. We hear you now. Ambassador Dayal, let me just come to you on that question as well. How do you view the evolution of the relationship between India and Russia in the backdrop of what is happening between India and the United States and, of course, the war in Ukraine as well?
Well, I would like to evaluate first the historical evolution of the relationship between India and the United States, which would help us to better understand the evolution of the relationship between India and Russia. You know, India and the United States are natural allies. We are both democracies. India is the world's largest democracy. The United States is the world's oldest democracy. We are both multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious. But unfortunately, what was happening when India became independent was that the US was emphasizing either you are with us or you're against us. India wanted to pursue strategic autonomy. And that is why India became a major player in the non-aligned movement. Now, the United States misperceived it because, as I said, its view was either you are with us or you're against us. So non-alignment was perceived by the United States as hostile. That drove India towards Russia because the United States was strengthening its relations with Pakistan, including defense ties, which were being cultivated with dictatorships like that of General Ayub Khan. And all this was harming India. So India developed closer relationship with the Russians because it needed to offset the dangers which were developing on account of the Pakistan-US relationship. Now, let me carry on just by one or two other points. Mr. Rubin said that we must realize that Donald Trump is a lame duck president. How do we factor that in? It is for the American people to decide who is effective in their foreign policy establishment, who is not. He said we should reach out to Congress. The Congress has been powerless because these 50% tariffs which have been imposed in India and which are hurting our exports as also our economy have not happened with any sort of congressional intervention, as the president has done, and the Congress has failed to do anything. So we have to factor in our own geopolitical independence and pursue strategic autonomy, which we are trying to do.
Ambassador, we hear you. Of course, I'm also now being joined by my colleague Siddhant Mishra, with us Akanksha Swaroop, Simran Babbar and Arun Dhanta. Thank you so much all for joining us. Simran, let me just come to you. Of course, there is going to be a focus on the strategic and privileged partnership here. We are potentially looking at a no-limits partnership between India and Russia. I'm sure you heard what our esteemed guests were also saying. How much of a factor do you think the United States is here? And what sort of breakthroughs are we expecting during this visit?
Well, absolutely, Hem. And in fact, starting on the very same point that you had earlier made about the United States, in a series of first reactions that has come in, closely watching these developments and how exactly this entire relationship is coming to also unfold a new series of bilateral ties, and how New Delhi and Moscow are forging ahead to sign a host of pacts specifically targeting, in fact, trade and defense. What really importantly also to be noted at this point is that on the same month in which Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited and decided to visit India, on December 25th, the 15-year anniversary on the adoption of the elevation of the Russia-India relations to the special and privileged partnership is also going to be celebrated. It is in fact going to be 25 years since Russian President Vladimir Putin first came to India for an annual summit with then Atal Bihari Vajpayee as the Prime Minister, and now where we stand is also a huge testament of how over these years, starting from the Soviet Union era as well, now the relationships have transformed themselves into the partnership that has stood the test of time. Very categorically also mentioning that not just this kind of a bilateral relations that has been elevated to the special and privileged partnership, but very importantly to be noted that the imports and the exports, which is going to be a very huge sector as bilateral pacts and the separate delegation level talks of the industry partners is also going to be taking place, as India is also hoping for Russia to import more. And in fact, even in this October as well, when a record $68.7 billion have been hit as a trade during even when the secondary tariffs were in place, this is also going to be a huge, in fact, roadmap for the 100 billion trade deal that has been set in place, and how that can also lead forward to these delegations that which will be coming into the shape.
All right, of course, that is something we will discuss further as well. Do stay on with me. Of course, there's lots to discuss here. Let's tell our viewers about the vehicle that Putin traveled in just for a little bit. The Orisinat, a fortress on wheels is what it's called, stretching over 5.5 meters in length, 2 meters in width, engineered to withstand the most extreme threats. The Orisinat offers VR8 to VR10 level ballistic protection. Every body panel and window is bulletproof, keeping the occupants safe and high caliber attacks. From high caliber attacks, the underbody is reinforced to also absorb explosive impact, while the fuel tank is also explosion resistant, ensuring safety even in the most volatile of situations. Equipped with run-flat tires, the Orisinat continues to drive even after sustaining damage, giving them the freedom to escape danger without hesitation. The cabin air system is fully chemical-proof, protecting occupants from airborne threats, toxins or hazardous environments. Secure communications tool, and rest assured that emergency escape systems are built into the vehicle for quick and safe exits. All right, let me just go back to Akanksha Swaroop, Arun Dhanta, Siddhant Mishra and Simran Babbar, who are joining us live for all the developments on ground. Akanksha, let me just come to you. I had to give our viewers a little bit of trivia there also. Akanksha, of course, there is also going to be a major focus on trade and on connectivity. And to that end, I wanted to ask you, how much significance do you place on the recently ratified reciprocal exchange of logistical supports agreement as well by Russia ahead of this visit?
Right. It's a very key aspect of this bilateral partnership, which is now veering towards trade, primarily is going to hinge on trade. Remember, it is in December that the oil trade will be hitting its lowest between India and Russia in the last few years, ever since the war began in Ukraine. So as the Commerce Minister, Shri Piyush Goyal, was highlighting that this has been a partnership which now needs to be diversified. The trade basket has to be diversified. And we are currently at Bharat Mandapam, where the Ross Congress is taking place. Yesterday was the India-Russia Business Forum, of course, collaboration with FICCI. So that only goes on to indicate how President Putin's state visit, the kind of importance it's bestowing on the role that trade is going to be playing, on the role that, say, connectivity is also going to play, on the role that labor mobility will be playing, on the role that digital financial transactions between India and Russia is going to be playing. So because we are looking towards merging RuPay and even MOUs, and all of that will be up for discussion apart from the big bet on defense partnership. So having said that, we are here at Ross Congress, which should be kick-starting in some time from now. But most importantly, this is one strategic partnership that has already been elevated to a privileged alliance now between India and Russia. And so when President Putin goes on to say that he's looking towards, trade ties which are unending as far as even China and India both are concerned, trade is going to be playing a very key role, because even though the oil trade is going down, it would be unfair to say that this is one partnership which has only been hinging on, say, oil trade. Because remember, the oil trade only went up after the war in Ukraine began. So to say that India has always partnered as far as seaborne oil is concerned is going to be a tad bit unfair. But we can expect greater deals, say, in sectors of agriculture, pharmaceuticals, automobiles. Many of those delegation level Russians, in fact, have arrived here in the national capital, and they are going to be forging ties. Much of it is already shaping up, as we can see, and Ross Congress is going to be very much part of President's agenda today. We can expect action to now shift to the Bharat Mandapam in, say, post-afternoon around 3 o'clock. Hey.
All right, absolutely, Akanksha. Thank you so much for bringing us that. Of course, do stay on with us, please. Now we also have with us our guest, Ambassador Prabhu Dayal, and also Matthew Vadam, American journalist from Washington, D.C. Mr. Vadam, let me just come to you first. How do you assess the significance of this visit, and how is United States viewing this visit of the Russian president to India as well?
Well, India has always been part of the what used to be called the non-aligned movement, so it's not surprising that India is maintaining its ties with Russia. I don't think the U.S. government looks favorably upon this visit because the U.S. government, the Trump administration, has been trying to pressure India to break off its relations with Russia and to not purchase oil, to not purchase energy from Russia because that provides funds for Russia to continue its war in Ukraine. And that has been the main U.S. interest in trying to dissuade India from having warmer relations with Russia.
All right, Ambassador Dayal, let me just bring you in on that point as well. What do you have to say about that?
Well, you know, India has been singled out for the oil tariffs by the Trump administration. Other countries, including China and many European countries, are buying energy and oil supplies from Russia, but they have not had these tariffs imposed. So we do note that we have been singled out for this. Nonetheless, let me mention that regardless of the pressure which the United States tries to bear on India, we are attaching a lot of importance to Vladimir Putin's visit because it carries diplomatic, economic, and strategic importance. And it is primarily aimed at reaffirming and strengthening their special and privileged strategic partnership amidst the shifting global geopolitics and Western pressure on India. Let me mention that we have been extremely disheartened by the fact that President Trump, in his second term, has been imposing a lot of tariffs on trade where India is concerned and also augmented them with the oil-related tariffs. So we are hurt by U.S. actions. And if the U.S. is trying to say that it's exerting pressure on India to distance itself from Russia, the point is, what is the United States doing with other countries, such as those in Europe, which are also big purchasers of Russian oil and gas? We feel that we have been treated unduly harshly, and we keep our options open. You know, India is not a small country. India is a big global player. We are the world's fifth largest economy. We would like to keep our options open. We like to take decisions which serve our own interests. And if purchasing oil from Russia serves to meet our interests, because our energy requirements are enormous, then we will certainly fashion our policy, keeping in mind, as I said, our own interests.
Right, Ambassador Dayal and Mr. Varam, please do stay on with us. We will be discussing that further. Let me just go across to my colleagues Arun Dhanta and Siddharth Mishra. Thank you so much for staying on so patiently with me. Arun, let me just come to you. Let's talk about trade. As Ambassador was mentioning as well, India has a responsibility to, of course, prioritize its own strategic interests. To that end, of course, we are seeing that there's this goal to reach $100 billion in bilateral trade. That's a target set for 2030. Right now, we are seeing a deficit. Currently, that trade number is at $68 billion that you'd mentioned earlier. What sort of strategies do you think India will have at its disposal to reach that target?
Well, that's right. Last year, remember, this target was fixed of $100 billion for 2030 between both the countries. And we've been discussing this earlier, Haim, that India, of course, would be wary of this fact that they are also doing trade talks with the United States and also, of course, with the European Union. And both of them, of course, have been speaking about this, that India could play a huge role in stopping war between Russia and Ukraine. So United States and European Union would be watching this visit and the outcome of this visit very closely. Of course, there's a trade deficit between Russia and India. India, of course, would be eyeing on that front, and therefore the economic areas, you know, especially those areas where Russia is in demand because of the sanction from the Western countries. Pharmaceutical is one such sector where India India is already doing good exports to Russia, but they would want to increase it more. You will have the agriculture sector, which has been facing dent due to the additional sanctions from the tariff from the United States side on India. So Indian market would, of course, would be looking at Russia, for that, especially the sea products, seafood, etc., because those were the products which India hugely would send to United States. And now when you have this additional 25% tariff on India, many of people associated with that have shifted somewhere else. They are eyeing for a bigger market, so Russia can actually fill in there. And also, of course, automobile sector is also an important sector where India can expand with Russia. So as their fixed $100 billion target for 2030, can that be achieved amidst all these talks with United States and European Union? That's something which is going to be very, very crucial to watch during this visit of Putin.
All right, let me just come to you now, Siddhant. Thank you so much for waiting so patiently. And now, of course, just to expand on what Arun was also saying, let's talk about that 100 billion target for 2030 that India has set for itself. That being said, how do you view the strengthening of trade and connectivity between the two nations? Are we expected to see any sort of bilateral agreements on this or any sort of breakthroughs?
Well, hey, this has been in talks from a very long time, and trade deficit has been the concern of the Indian government from the very long time. In fact, Russian side very well acknowledge this concern of the Indian government. So, at the time of this visit, the business delegation, both from Russia and India, have been meeting from last 2 days. In fact, we have been told that they have been given tasks to plan out strategy how to reduce the trade deficit. Now, the biggest issue here is that that Russia welcomes Indian companies to be coming to Russia to invest, to set up plants, to start manufacturing units, etc., etc. But most of these Indian companies have their trading relations and their offices in Europe and United States. So if these companies move to Russia, set up a manufacturing unit, perhaps they could come under the sanctions. So this is the biggest concern. Point number one. Point number two, as far as trade deficit is concerned, because Russia was removed from the SWIFT payment systems. In fact, for the longest time between Russia and India, when India was importing crude, there were billions and billions of dollars of Russia was in the Indian bank accounts, because there could not be payments made to the Russian side. Then somehow the payment mechanism was worked out between the two sides. Now, to reduce the trade deficit, the first thing which is required is the private players to be coming up and increase exports to Russia. First point. Second, there is also talks about the collaboration between Indian rupee systems and MOUs systems of Russia. In fact, yesterday, Russian First Deputy Prime Minister Denis Menturov met Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman in Parliament, and perhaps that meeting was all about to connect the payment systems, because if this system gets connected, then Indian businessmen can export things to Russia, and perhaps he can be getting the payment done in the local currency. So there are a lot of technical issues also him. It's not that easy, and I say it very responsibly that Russians have been trying from last 2 years to get Indian private players to be investing in Russia. They have been speaking to the big players also, but because out of the fear of sanctions, getting sanctioned by the US and the Europe, Indian private players have largely been resisting the offers being made by the Russian government. But hopefully, since the delegations are meeting, perhaps we could see some change in the approach in days to come.
Now, Russian President Vladimir Putin is in India for his 2-day state visit for the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. Prime Minister Narendra Modi personally received Putin at the airport, breaking the protocol. The two leaders shook hands, shared a warm hug and even a ride together in the same car before a private dinner at the Prime Minister's residence. Today, the focus shifts to diplomacy and to business. President Putin will be accorded a ceremonial reception at Rashtrapati Bhavan. After that, he will pay tributes to Mahatma Gandhi at Rajghat. Later in the day, the stage is set for delegation-level talks with Prime Minister Narendra Modi at the Hyderabad House, followed by meetings with India's top corporate leaders. This visit marks Putin's first trip to India since the war in Ukraine began, and both nations are expected to sign key agreements to strengthen their special and privileged strategic partnership. Now, defense is at the heart of President Vladimir Putin's India visit. Talks today are likely to zero in on pending S-400 missile deliveries and possible future orders as well.
Russian-made S-400 air defense system proved highly effective during Operation Sindoor, targeting multiple Pakistani aircraft and neutralizing hostile aerial threats. Their performance made it evident that India would eventually consider expanding its fleet of these long-range units. Now, with the Russian President Vladimir Putin arriving in India, discussions are expected to go beyond the existing S-400 contract and include the advanced S-500 system and Russia's fifth-generation Su-57 fighter jet. Defense Minister Rajnath Singh will hold a bilateral meeting with his Russian counterpart at the Manekshaw Center. This will be a key moment for formal discussion on future defense cooperation, including S-400 follow-on units and potential procurement of the S-500 and also Su-57. Later, Prime Minister Narendra Modi and President Putin will also meet, and that engagement may lead to some firm outcomes. The Indian Air Force currently operates 3 S-400 squadrons inducted under a landmark agreement signed in 2018 with deliveries beginning in 2021. 2 more squadrons are still pending. Along with completing the original order, New Delhi is now exploring the possibilities of procuring additional units and possibly transitioning to the next generation S-500. The S-500 is a platform, in fact an upgrade to the S-400, and is a defense system built to counter a wide spectrum of threats. It is designed to intercept aircraft, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, hypersonic weapons, and even low-orbit satellites. The claimed range extends to roughly 500 to 600 kilometers, with the capability to engage threats at extremely high altitudes, reportedly up to 180 to 200 kilometers.
All right, and in news that we're just getting right now, Prime Minister Modi presented a copy of the Gita in Russian to Russian President Vladimir Putin. He posted this on X, stating that the teachings of the Gita gave inspiration to millions across the world. Further sign of the bonhomie shared by India and Russia and the strong cultural and people-to-people ties between the two nations as well. For more on this, we have with us Siddhant. Siddhant, thank you so much for joining us. Now, that gesture by Prime Minister Narendra Modi there, giving the Gita, Russian translated copy of the Gita to Russian President Vladimir Putin, it just goes to show the strong cultural ties the two nations share as well.
Well, that's right. In fact, yesterday, President Putin was at 7 LKM for about 3 hours. Both leaders held a private conversation. It was just Prime Minister Modi and President Putin with the interpreters. In fact, Prime Minister Modi gifted President Putin Gita written in Russian language. It's a very special gesture by Prime Minister Modi. Also, Gita is a book which is about the conversations between Arjun and Bhagwan Krishna during the battle of Kurukshetra, where Bhagwan Krishna is guiding Arjun and preaching him about life, purpose, dharma, how important how important it is to follow the path of dharma. So definitely a very symbolic gesture by Prime Minister Modi to be gifting Gita to President Putin, especially at a time when his country is at a war with Ukraine. The war is going on from 2022. Prime Minister Modi has always said that that solutions cannot be found on the battlefield. Solutions can only be found through dialogue and diplomacy, not an era of war, etc., etc. So India's position is clear. Prime Minister Modi's position is clear. Prime Minister Modi has always contributed when it comes to peace efforts in Ukraine. And yesterday he gifted Bhagavad Gita to President Putin. Again, a very symbolic gesture. And as I said, that Gita is about the conversation between Bhagwan Krishna and Arjun in the battlefield of Kurukshetra.
Right, we also have Simran Babbar joining us and Arun Dhanta, who are joining us live right now as well. Arun, let me just come to you. Of course, as Siddhant also mentioned, India has always focused on the path of dialogue and diplomacy. It has urged this at international forums as well. That being said, we are seeing a strengthening of ties by way of this visit by the Russian President Vladimir Putin. This the focus is solely on firmly on defense and further deepening their ties. What sort of engagements and what sort of moves can we see when it comes to those?
Well, that's right. India-Russia relationship has a huge history, and we have seen that when nobody was with India, it was Russia, and therefore Prime Minister Modi called it an all-weather friendship with Russia. And in fact, that has been on display. Yesterday, we saw Prime Minister Modi going to the airport, waiting for Russian President there for almost half an hour. He checked all the preparations for his welcoming, and then finally traveled both of them together to LKM, and therefore that special private dinner for Vladimir Putin. So that signifies that how important is Russia and Vladimir Putin for India. Now, coming back to today's itinerary, today's plan of Vladimir Putin, and that is also signify, we all know that this visit is going to be high on optics and the pageantry associated with this state visit. So today you will have Vladimir Putin going to Rajghat, and that is also signify the cultural respect that he gives to India, and of course paying his respects to Mahatma Gandhi there. We all know the importance of Mahatma Gandhi for the country, and therefore he will of course be giving that message through that visit. And then of course you will have that presidential reception at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, which is right behind me, and that is also very, very important, because remember, you will have that presidential reception, tri-services guard, you will have the contingent from the Army, Navy and Air Force there standing in the honor of the President Vladimir Putin. That signifies that he's not only the guest of the government, he's the guest of the nation, and that is very, very significant. You will also have 21 gun salute that he'll be getting. Both the nations, the national anthem will be sung, and you will have, of course, President and Prime Minister present there. So he has a jam-packed schedule today. Defense sector, of course, economic cooperation and the global scenario. All these things will be at table. What is important is what comes out in that joint statement, because India will have to be wary about United States. Remember him that India is in talks with United States and European Union for the FTA. So they will have to really tread very cautiously, because they will be keeping a very close eye on this visit and what comes out of it.
Absolutely. Let me just come to you now, Simran. Where are you right now? If you could just show us around a little bit. And also, of course, as we've been discussing, the focus is firmly on special and privileged strategic partnership, and to reinforce this. And of course, we do know that there will be one global player that will be watching this visit very closely, and that is the United States. What can you tell us?
Well, absolutely, Hem, as you clearly pointed out, now we see the pictures yesterday night are a testament of the close ties and the personal warmth of the relationship between India and Russia. Right now, as you have also asked, I am at ITC Moria, where the special protocol that have been in place for the surveillance and the security and enhanced arrangement that have been made for a very comfortable and honorable show of solidarity for the hospitality of Russian President Vladimir Putin at ITC. And right now, as you can see, there is in fact a complete security protocol as most of the security agencies have also set up their bases. The entry is very minutely guarded with complete precision, as you also spoke about the strategic ties, and more importantly the focus is going to be on a full state protocol visit starting this morning as well, where from the starting at the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where Russian President Vladimir Putin will be given the ceremonial welcome, and following that in fact is going to be his visit to Rajghat, where he's also going to be participating in the wreath laying ceremony, as well as in fact the guard of honor that will be presented by all the 3 Indian armed services. Later on in fact at Hyderabad House, what we are going to also anticipate in the day is in fact also the talks that are going to be in a bilateral manner being held with Indian Prime Minister, in fact Prime Minister Narendra Modi, and that is going to be also at the focus of many of the subjects that are on the dais, including the FTA and the 2030 roadmap for the strategic area of India-Russia Economic Forum, including mobility as well. That has been much in focus. There are talks going on to make travel simpler for Indians in Russia, for a demand that is being likely made for visa-free entry in Russia, that is also on the dais. There is much more to anticipate as well, as in fact the day has begun. There is going to be a full day stay, long protocol for the state visit, starting up after in fact the ceremonial welcome at the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Back to you.
Right. Now, Siddhant, Arun and Simran, do stay on with us. There's going to be lots to discuss and lots to unpack as we track all the developments through the course of the... However, trade is one of the major focus areas of this crucial visit of Russian President Vladimir Putin. India and Russia have a trade volume of approximately $69 billion, of which Indian exports to Russia make up only close to $4.8 billion, while Russian imports to India amount to around $65 billion. Therefore, the scale, it's not just tipped in favor of Russia, but the trade deficit amounts to the second largest deficit India has with any other country, this after China. Can this gap be bridged during this visit of the Russian president? That remains the big question. All right, and in more information that we're just getting, amid Russian President Vladimir Putin's visit to India, Trump says working very hard to stop Russia-Ukraine war. We're making peace all over the world. We will stop Russia-Ukraine war. You know, these are the comments by U.S. President Donald Trump.
But our big focus is on Russian President Vladimir Putin, who is in India on a 2-day state visit. He was welcomed last night at the airport by Prime Minister Modi, a rare gesture reflecting the warmth in bilateral ties, a break in protocol. The 2 leaders shared a handshake, a warm hug, and even rode together before a 3-hour-long private dinner which the Prime Minister hosted at his residence. Modi also gifted Putin a Russian edition of the Bhagavad Gita, underscoring shared cultural respects. Today, the focus turns to diplomacy, to economic engagement. Putin will receive a ceremonial welcome at the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. That's going to happen in under an hour. He will then pay his respects at the Rajghat, and then he will meet Prime Minister Modi at the Hyderabad House for the delegation-level talks and to co-chair the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. The agenda also includes meetings with India's top corporate honchos. There's going to be a CEO's roundtable and a Russia-India business forum that both leaders will co-chair in the afternoon. And that, of course, is a signal to push and strengthen trade and investment as well as strategic cooperation between Moscow and Delhi. With both sides looking to reset and deepen ties, today's discussions will set the stage for a series of deals, whether it's on energy, defense, technology, future-oriented dimension of this high-profile visit. You can expect 10 intergovernmental deals to be announced and signed when both leaders meet later today. So, So far, one of the big pillars of this relationship has been on defense, whether it is on tanks, whether it's on missile defense systems, fighter jets. One of the deals that's being talked about, the Russians clearly seem to be pushing this quite a bit, is the fifth generation fighter jet, the Sukhoi 57. In fact, the Kremlin spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, confirmed that this is very much on the agenda in the press conference that he held a couple of days ago. There are currently two big fifth generation fighter jets that are in the market, and both are vying for big orders from India. One is the F-35, the Lockheed Martin American-made F-35, and the Sukhoi 57, which is a Russian fifth generation fighter. While the Americans want India to buy the F-35, Trump has made no bones about it. The Russian offer raises the stakes. So how do these two fifth generation fighters stack up against each other? The F-35 is a single-engine fifth-generation fighter jet. It's produced by Lockheed Martin. The Sukhoi, on the other hand, is produced by Russia with United Aircraft Corporation. The Sukhoi 57 showcased in the Bangalore Air Show earlier this year. It's a twin-engine fifth-generation fighter. It brings 3D thrust vectoring to the table, which is an option that's missing on the F-35. The American F-35 tops out at Mach 1.6, which is 1.6 times the speed of sound. It carries a ferry range of over 1,600 kilometers. The Sukhoi can go up to 2 times the speed of sound, Mach 2, and it offers a 3,500 kilometer ferry range. The combat radius of the F-35 is shorter compared to the Sukhoi 57. It offers a combat range of 1,900 kilometers. The price tag, and this is where there is a critical difference, the F-35 is over $100 million per unit. The Sukhoi 57, on the other hand, is between $35 and $45 million, and that could, of course, make a significant difference eventually in which of these two jets India chooses. The F-35 has been operational for the last 10 years. The Sukhoi 57 entered the market 5 years later in 2020. So far, Lockheed Martin has built over 100 units of the F-35, whereas the Sukhoi 57, just about 30-odd units. Before we go to our reporters, I want to get a quick take from the expert here in our studios, General Pandey. Ultimately, India's got to choose. It's going to be a big order. Which of these two you think is in the reckoning, or at least has its nose ahead?
Yeah, so I think we just started by saying India loves America but trusts Russia. I think look at the deals we signed with them, the delays which have happened on a simple platform, which is a very, very old platform called Apaches. The deliveries got delayed by years. Your engines, which are required to be pushing our Tejas program, has been delayed because we aren't getting the G engines, and also where Americans actually, there's a lot of perception, by the way, in India that the bureaucratic system in US is pretty fast. But I can assure you it is quite episodic, laggard, and it also shifts with the relationship where they want to, bind India into some sort of a pushback that either you are with us, so we'll allow the next step of release of defense equipment which has been sold to you, by the way. So, even the promises don't get fulfilled.
But General, the Russians are also not exactly delivering on time. Okay. I mean, they're still talking about the Akula-class nuclear submarine, which I think they've signed that deal in 2018, 19. I mean, it's been
correct. But
over
you
5
please
years.
look at it, they're saying that Americans are not tied up with the war, with Russians are.
Of course.
There's the issue of COVID which happened in between. I'm not a supporter of a Russian bloc or a American bloc, but I'm just putting the perspective right in place. That is one part. The second is when you look at the two platforms. I'm not a pilot, but very clearly Sukhoi 57 takes an edge for F-35. If you see I think in last about 6 months, 3 to 4 crashes of F-35 have happened. Well, people are talking about Tejas in a show when when it crashed the way it did. But nobody's talking about the F-35 crashes which have taken place. There is an issue of this thing. As Su-57 is far, far more advanced, faster, quicker, more agile platform, twin engine which gives a backup. And of course, cost factor in 100 million for one F-35, you will get 3 off. But more important, I guess, is for India, which is looking for technological upgrade of a defense ecosystem in Atmanirbhar Bharat. I think Sukhoi 57 offers, because they intend, after selling us the first 30, if I'm not wrong, the balance are likely to be made in India. That actually shifts. You look at the BrahMos system, the old joint development program allowed India to emerge out of those restrictions which were being placed, and today we are making it in India and we are selling it to the countries. This allows a different paradigm shift in the defense ecosystem for us. So
Let me
I
also
think I'll
get a
look at
view
this,
from the American side. Lieutenant Daniel Davis is a senior fellow with Defense Priorities. He's also joining us. So General Pandey here saying that, look, there is a trust factor that seems to have been broken with the Americans, particularly this whole GE jet engine deal that was supposed to have happened. It was signed in 2023. We still haven't seen that technology transfer happen. And that is driving a wedge in as far as the trust is concerned, whereas with Russia, even today, more than 50% of India's defense inventory comes from the Russian side, whether it's your missiles, your missile defense systems, and now, of course, the fighter jets. How does America counter that?
Well, America's going to have to change some of their ways that we're doing business. That's the bottom line here. If we are going to earn India's trust, and of course, President Trump right now is trying to and has been trying to put the screws on India to say, hey, stop buying Russian oil. And, we have this extra 25% tariff on top of them to trying to get them to come back. That was always going to be a losing play because the cost to India to actually do what President Trump wanted would be more expensive than the tariffs are, in my view. And plus, that would also cause damage between India and Russia, which India has not wanted to do. And really, I think, and look, I'm just being honest about this, I think that the United States is obviously between President Trump and President Biden has been very different in how they've approached India. And President Trump can change his mind in a minute and ask something different and be really hard one day and all of a sudden really nice the next day and talking something different. So India's got to think, what is actually the play of the United States? What is their intent? What is their strategy toward India? And how are we going to work together? And I'm not sure that there's a clear answer on that from India's perspective, whereas Russia seems to, whether you like it or not, they seem to be pretty consistent with what they're offering. And as you point out, 50% of your military stuff does come from Russia, and Russia is obviously trying to court India as well. So India's kind of in a place where it wants to be, where it's not really taking a firm stand on either side. They don't want to, I don't believe. They want to do business with everybody, which I think is a pretty good way. And I wish the United States would follow a little bit more of that, frankly. But I guess to answer your question, in order to really get India to move even in the direction of the United States, we're going to have to get more consistent and to do things, I think, that have more win-win opportunities and not just threaten India.
Okay, Lieutenant Davis, just hang on for a minute. I also want to go across to our reporters. Siddhant and Akanksha are joining us, so we can open this on our virtual wall. Siddhant is there at the Hyderabad House, where at noon the official delegation-level talks will begin and the opening of the 23rd Annual India-Russia Summit. So Siddhant is there and Akanksha is at the Bharat Mandapam, where later in the afternoon both the leaders will co-chair a CEO's roundtable and an India-Russia business forum. Siddhant, what can we expect in terms of the deals? The MEA has been talking about 10 government-to-government deals and about 15 commercial MOUs. What can we expect today?
Well, Zaka, the fact is that Russians have been pushing from a long time for S-500, Su-57. In fact, ahead of this meeting today at the Dubai Air Show, Russians openly gave offer to India for Su-57 with tech transfer, joint production, etc., etc. So, they have been pushing these products. In fact, yesterday there was intergovernmental military-to-military cooperation meeting which took place between Raksha Mantri Rajnath Singh and his Russian counterpart. Perhaps there also these proposals were made by the Russian side. And today also it is very likely that during the delegation level talks, Russians will again be bringing up these items for discussion. And India is very happy to listen to the Russian proposals, but it has to go through an evaluation process, which has is still not started. Even S-500 units have not been tested yet. So India is happy to listen to the proposal, and in fact, India is happy to engage also as far as discussion on these proposals are concerned. In fact, Zaka, the same is the case with small and medium advanced reactors. In the month of February, at the time of the budget, India had announced the civil nuclear goals ahead of Prime Minister Modi's visit to Washington. Washington. And in fact, there is a lot of speculation that there's going to be some announcement as far as nuclear cooperation is concerned. But if you remember, Zaka, last time around also when Prime Minister Modi visited Moscow, Russians were talking about signing of some agreements as far as nuclear cooperation is concerned. They want to develop small and medium advanced reactors in India. So they have been pushing this also from a long time. But there has not been any commitment given to the Russians so far as far as nuclear cooperation is concerned.
Okay.
So there are key players. U.S. is there, France is there, Russia is there. As far as small, medium, advanced reactors are concerned. So India has to properly evaluate and look at the proposals by the companies in these countries, and perhaps then to decide. So mostly the focus is going to be on the bilateral issues, Zaka, as we have been discussing. Mobility agreement, trade deficit is a big concern. Fertilizers, again, India, Eurasia FTA, which is being negotiated. So that is also will be coming up for discussion, and also the perspective on regional and global issues.
Okay, so let me also go to Akanksha on the trade and economic front, and people have been talking about this. India has the second highest trade deficit with Russia. The only other country with which India has a higher trade deficit is with China. But with Russia, it's singularly because of one item which contributes more than 90% of India's imports from Russia, which is oil. So one of the attempts that they will try and make today, and I guess the pitch to the CEOs will also be around that, as to how to diversify Indian exports to Russia, whether it's pharmaceuticals, whether it's textiles, leather, etc. Is that something that is on the anvil, and how do India and Russia address this whole trade deficit question?
So interestingly, Zaka, yes, we are at the Bharat Mandapam where the India-Russia Business Forum has happened today. The CEO roundtable is going to be happening. And much of the sectors where we are looking to diversify, as Commerce Minister Mr. Piyush Goyal already highlighted yesterday, have been enlisted by Siddhant as he was speaking right now, whether it is pharma, automobiles, energy, even you're looking at fertilizers, agricultural products, all of those aspects and those sectors will be looked at. But how do you do that? A critical point is now going to be, as I'm gauging from our conversations with the Russian delegation and FICCI members, is the rewiring of the money pipes. When I talk about it, you're talking about a direct settlement as far as ruble is concerned. This is one settlement format that goes all the way back to the 1950s. But ever since sanctions were hit on Russia, remember, it has been cut off from the Western financial banking system. And that fear had sort of started creeping into Indian investors who were looking towards investing in Russia. And so this year itself, in August 2025, the RBI eased that system for Russian investors and companies which had extra rupee. They were, in fact, eased to allow the Russian investors to look towards investing in Indian bonds, Indian infrastructure, other forms as well, if you look at settlements. Now, if you talk about RuPay, you talk about Mir and, of course, the rupee settlement. We are looking towards digitally sort of linking all of that. And how is this going to aid? This is going to aid tourism. Tourists will be able to use the RuPay card in Russia to make those payments over there.
Okay.
At the same time, students in Russia can use this entire settlement. As far as pharmaceuticals is concerned, medicine and money payments could be now used in this sector as well, as making payments for the energy, crude payments will also happen through this financial digital system that President Putin's state visit will now ensure finally gets linked at a time when Russia is feeling extremely isolated because of these sanctions slapped on their banking system.
There's also chatter about visa-free travel or visa-on-arrival travel for Indian tourists into Russia. We'll see if that happens, if that's one of the agreements that will be signed today. Thank you very much, Siddhant and Akanksha. We'll be in touch with you as and when there are further developments. But, we talked about the Su-57 versus the F-35. Tatiana Kukreva is also joining us. But Abhijit, the other thing that the Russians are really pushing India to buy more is the S-400 batteries. I don't think the last two have been delivered yet, but the Russians are very keen that India buys more S-400s. They're even offering some kind of co-production of the S-500. I don't know if you've crossed that bridge or got to that bridge yet, but this whole missile defense system, and particularly the fact that it was brought into sharp relief just a few months ago during Operation Sindoor.
So, the Russians have actually have a very good record with technology transfer. If anyone's been lacking, it's been India. So, they transferred the entire Sukhoi 30 technology. We failed to, internalize the engine. With the BrahMos, again, they transferred everything, including the engine technology. We failed to produce the engine, the rocket motor ourselves. But we've done lots of other things with the BrahMos. You can see our nuclear submarine program got significant help from the Russians. It's going from place to place. With the Americans, they have significant security concerns. At the same time, we need to remember the Su-57 is the same aircraft that we had partnered with them for over 7 years. They refused to even share the initial technical drawings when the final product came out. We rejected it on quality basis, saying extremely poor construction, extremely poor design. It did not suit our operational needs. We dumped this aircraft. Remember, the Russians aren't even using the Su-57 in Ukraine. If it is such a fifth generation game changer, you saw what the F-35 did in Iran. Why aren't the Russians able to replicate such results, in Ukraine? They're up against F-16s and Mirage 2000, old versions of that. And they're still not able to do it, right? So there's a bit of a thing out here. Even if we get the F-35, assuming it's a better plane, are we able to maintain it? Do we have the resources? Because it's a highly networked plane. It's like buying a Apple laptop in an Android ecosystem kind of thing. It's not going to work. So there is really no good options for us. Maybe if we get in the Su-75, which is the single engine equivalent, the Russian equivalent, and get into the networks and systems right now, maybe, but given the quality of Russian construction right now, big question mark. The S-400, look, with missiles, we have never had a problem with Russian technology transfer on missiles. The issue has always been a question of Russian quality in what they consider to be fifth generation weapons. The S-400 at intercepting aircraft, it's very, very good. Ballistic missiles, still a question mark, we don't know yet.
Anand Ranganathan, again, the challenge here is obviously if there is going to be any announcement on the fifth generation, I don't think there will be one today. There are two factors that India needs to take into account. One is the fact that we're down to now 29 squadrons. We're pretty much on the same par as the Pakistanis are. And the other is, if we do announce, then there is going to be a collateral. Certainly a businessman like Trump is not going to like that.
No, look, what are we talking about here? Zaka, we're talking about a country that is run by a dictator. There is no press freedom. We're talking about a country where there is no opposition. There is no freedom of expression. We're talking about a country that is waging war on its neighbors, funding through its resources. We're talking about Saudi Arabia, not Russia. And yet, you have America having a roaring trade of $43 billion with the same Saudis. Yet we have a NATO-like pact that's just been signed, Trump has signed it, where attack on Saudi would be attack on America. As a layman, we can talk about the specifics of trade, but what hits me and what angers me is the rank hypocrisy of the West. Either don't be hypocritical. If you are, you can't stop India from pursuing its own strategic and defense goals. So I think whatever is on the table, it will be negotiated. India is a hard bargainer, there's no doubt about it. Abhijit will vie for that. And at the end of the day, we are going to get as much out of Russia as Russia is getting out of us, Trump or no Trump.
Tatiana Kukreva is also joining us. Again, the challenge before both leaders is, and this has been sort of some amount of historic baggage as well, it was essentially a defense relationship. Now it's become a defense and energy relationship. But you've got to move beyond that. You've got to talk about pharmaceuticals. You've got to talk about, I put out this data point yesterday. There are 70,000 Indians working in Russia right now. There are 5 million Indian Americans. You have to have a much more broader base for this relationship if we have to take it to the next level. And that's something that they will be talking about through the delegation talks today, through the business forum today. What has been the challenge? Why hasn't it been actualized yet?
Well, look, Zaka, if we talk about, for instance, specifically Indian Americans, and we do understand that a lot of Indians come to study in the US, right?
Yeah.
That comes down to a very simple fact in India's past, the fact that people actually speak English. They didn't at least learn Russian as their second native language. basically. So it is a challenge in a way. However, like, let me tell you, there are so many programs being opened right now, and there are so many opportunities. And I believe that, we've actually seen it on the ground. There are more people coming from India. There's definitely more tourism, at least in the, in the capital, in St. Petersburg. We see those tourists. And from what I've at least gauged in the streets, they actually love it here. So the challenge with overcoming this idea that people here, you can't study in English. You actually can. We even have programs that where you can study in English, again, in the capital, and not just in the capital.
Are you also, sorry, I'm interrupting. Are you also hearing about this agreement that they will sign possibly for visa-free or visa on arrival entry for Indian tourists coming into Russia?
Yes, well, look, before it's signed, obviously, these are reports that would facilitate the situation much, much better. There's also, there's many programs that are being worked over within the Ministry of Tourism domestically to help foreign tourists, because obviously we understand the shortcomings, when it comes to the difficulties with the foreign bank cards and everything that comes with it. That as a Russian person, we faced these ourselves when we travel. We also are faced with the same problem. We have to come in with cash, or get creative, which is, with our history, this is massively what Russians have done throughout the years. So there are a lot of things in the works.
The Rupee Mir sort of exchange agreement is again one of the 10 that they're talking about. Yes, it is a problem. I mean, when most of your entities, your banks have basically been sanctioned out of the international financial system, then it is going to have an impact on daily life. It is going to have an impact on tourism, etc. But I want to bring it back to the defense conversation. And General, you wanted to make a point about why we should go for the Russian weapon systems more than the Americans. I mean, I do concede, yes, that the GE Tejas business has been a real letdown. The fact that there hasn't been technology transfer, even after the two heads of government agreed to it explicitly and signed an agreement 3 years ago almost, it still hasn't happened. And frankly, I don't see it happening anytime soon.
Yeah, so I wanted to actually make a couple of points here. One is about, I must say that there are more Russians in India than more Indians in Russia. I think maybe it's because of the weather and the comfort the Russians find in India when they come as tourists. That is one part. But I just want to make a quick point what Dr. Anand was saying, that who's going to sanction the Americans and the Europeans? Because I want to highlight 2 points. Even Germany and UK continue to pump oil or energy from Russia today. Who's sanctioning them? I'm not talking about China. But I'm talking to those people who are trying to educate us that you switch off the energy pipeline with the Russians. The second is who's going to sanction Americans because they continue to buy the nuclear fuel, which is supposed for this thing, which Putin said. The moment he was about to take off, he says that if America can buy nuclear fuel from us, why not India? So who's going to be sanctioning Americans? Who's going to put the tariff? The third point which I want to make out is that for nearly 3.5 or rather nearly 4 years, the Europeans have been pumping out energy from the gas from Russians so that they could diversify over a period of time. And they've been pumping hard. Actually, virtually everything which they have been pumping out has been fueling into the war economy. So who's going to be sanctioning and who's going to put them to task in tomorrow when everything has to going to be reconciled? So while you are getting after India, which possibly is the only one you can get after today to try and educate and try and tell us what to do this thing, which we are of course not doing. But who is going to take this battle back to these people who have been trying to sanction? But
so I guess one of the things you do is you're showing the Americans and the Europeans that India has options. I mean, through this visit. But beyond that, I mean, let's be realistic about what we can expect today and the future trajectory of this relationship. Abhijit.
Look, can I just get back to the GE engine for a minute?
Sure.
Look, I think we need to set things straight out here. GE had told us 6-7 years back what the delivery schedule was going to be. They've stuck to the delivery schedule. If you read what Angad Singh has been writing, the schedule had been very clear. 1 engine in the first year, 2 engines in the second year, and then 5 engines per year. I don't know where this thing has come out. I know there have been sources that keep putting out, informed sources that keep putting out the engine delivery is delayed. HAL already has 1 engine. Why haven't they handed over that LCA Tejas to the Air Force? There's something else happening out here. GE has been they've been sticking to the delivery schedule as far as we understand it. Also the tech transfer, if you read the document, it says intend to transfer technology based on India's preparedness. We've received a very deep briefing on this from the Americans on all the things they had expected from India, especially in terms of operational security, which India has not even gotten back to them, not even in a documentary fashion, even on implementing it down the line. I'm not going to blame America for things that they have not done. Let's blame America for things that they have done. The first thing is the hypocrisy. Imagine they're censuring us for buying oil, but you're buying uranium.
Yeah.
And when the Trump summit happened, it was the uranium purchase that had gone through the roof in terms of their own energy security. Now, let's assume that Trump has always been a commodities man. He's always been about, this sort of 19th century, early 20th century things that America should go control resources, be it Greenland, be it Canada merging into the United States of America, so on and so forth. I don't know why you'd want to do that, because Canada is a left-wing country and that's the last election the Republicans would ever win. This is something which I think we need to have done at we've actually handled it better than say the Europeans have. The Europeans have just caved in, gone groveling with, hat in hand and things like that. Tell me, if they have so much better diplomats, if Japan has better diplomats than us, how is it that everybody got sanctioned? How is it everybody got tariffed? The Swiss are trying so hard. I mean, come along, the Swiss. They're so inoffensive. I don't think anybody has ever had issues with Swiss chocolates or holes in their cheese. But they still got tariffs slapped down on them. The bigger picture is the relationship is going nowhere. These are talking points that we're talking about. Are tariffs causing problems? But remember, India-America trade actually went up post-tariff. It did not come down. Sure, some sectors are hit. Coimbatore, especially Tirupur, the textile sector is hit very badly. I know personally some 10-12 factories that have shut down. Look, when we're talking about bigger picture, we can't get into the minutiae bogging the entire picture down. There will be ups and downs. Remember, with the last government, you had huge issues with them funding NGOs which were running certain narratives in India and things like that. It was a much bigger security and foreign policy threat to India.
You think that was a bigger problem than the tariff?
Much bigger, much bigger. See, the hidden enemy, a person who's going to quietly get behind me and stab something in my back
is
much worse than, two boys at a bar essentially fighting it out.
It's a little more than boys in a bar. It's more like a guy who's going around and saying, I brought peace between India and Pakistan. But anyway, be that aside. See, look, it's a very simple thing. The only country, in my view, and this is really the elephant in the room, no one's talking about China. Trump wants to cut a deal with China. He's literally bending over backwards to cut a deal with Xi Jinping. Even the other day when that phone call happened, why? He got the Japanese Prime Minister to back off. Why is Trump interested? If tomorrow China were to attack Taiwan, can anybody here on this table or anyone who's joining us via satellite guarantee that the Americans will get involved? I don't think so. Trump is basically telling Xi Jinping it's for yours for the taking.
And all it's taken is 15 years for China to reach the place where it has. It just tells you the strength if you want, to dream where your country should. Of course, China is a different kettle of fish. But
what about us?
Yes, we've been, as far as, again, a layman, geopolitics is concerned, Zaka, we've been pretty adept at walking on eggshells. But we've at least made Trump walk on razor blades. And I'll tell you why. Not many people realize this. We've bought almost 2 billion barrels of Russian oil since the war began.
Yeah.
And you know how we paid through it? 35% through rupee and almost the rest through dirhams. Now, UAE has benefited from it. Trump, this is another point of discontentment as far as Trump is concerned, that we aren't paying in dollars. So, it's not just one aspect that we continue to defy the West because we expose their hypocrisy in buying Russian energy, is that how we are facilitating both words are working in this direction. I think we need to go forward with resoluteness as far as our relation with Russia is concerned, not decrease. But I don't know how we are going to democratically get around the sanctions that he's imposed on. He's not going to give us the exemptions that UK and Germany have got as far as the sanctions on Russian oil majors is concerned. If he does, he's going to, that's another bargain chip for Trump. But I suppose Mr. Piyush Goyal is on it.
No, the question is, and I'll ask Lieutenant Davis also this. I mean, Trump has deferred the tariffs on China. He's reduced, I think, the fentanyl tariffs by 10%. He's basically said, I'm going to Beijing in April. He's probably going to make a grand announcement of a grand bargain cut with China. And I keep coming back to that Taiwan question, because if Vladimir Putin has done what he has done in Ukraine over the last 3 years, and he's winning, let's be very clear about it. He's winning on the battlefield. What is to stop Xi Jinping from thinking that, look, this is my window of opportunity. I have this president for the next 3 years. I don't know who the next American president is going to be. I don't know how he's going to react if I attack Taiwan. He's going to take it. He's going to take that gamble, and maybe he'll win.
Well, see, my view is that if China makes that move, it's going to be because they calculate that the conditions on the ground in the Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific, and with Taiwan, that somehow that's going to be a benefit and they're going to succeed. I don't think it's going to be dependent on what does or doesn't happen in the Russia-Ukraine war, because those are radically different situations, strategically, tactically, operational, any way you want to look at it. And I don't think that the interest of the United States over there is equal to the interest of the United States over here. So I think I would be very careful in drawing too close analogies. But look, when we're talking about the issue of China and Taiwan and what the U.S. can and can't do, I have done a number of analysis on this, and there is no chance that the U.S. could fight China over Taiwan and win. And I think that President Trump knows that. I think President Xi Jinping knows that. And I think it's also true that Xi Jinping does not want to go to war with Taiwan. I think that he would only do it if he felt like they were literally going to go to independence. I don't think that if he saw a moment of vulnerability that he would say, now's my chance, because that would imply that they want to. And I don't think they do want to. I think they would like the status quo as long as it doesn't go independence. But there is a red line, and if it's crossed either by the United States or by Taiwan, I do think they would go. So I don't think it's a non-issue. I just don't think that there's a correlation between what happens in Ukraine and Russia.
I think it's one of his stated policies, this whole business of reunification, and he's going to look at the best window. And I don't think, I disagree with you, Lieutenant Davis, I think the occupant of the White House, at whatever point that happens, is going to be an important factor.
Zaka, just to add there, you see, if
the only
Ukraine
thing I would say, though, is let me add one thing. It's not going to matter who's in the White House. It's going to matter what the military, and we don't have the capacity, regardless of whether it's Trump, Biden, or somebody else in the next term. I think that's important to understand.
Yeah, you know, if Ukraine was in NATO, there's no way in hell that Russia would have attacked Ukraine. Let's get straight about that. America is still the most powerful country in the world. Now, as it happens, you know, I really, I think I take your, what you've said very seriously, because in 1979, I think it was, that till 1979, USA had a NATO-like pact with Taiwan. But then it started its relationship with China, as we know, and you know, that pact is no longer valid. So, I mean, this is a window that China sees as an opportunity to do what Russia has done. So I think there's nothing stopping it technically, except that Taiwan is much more adept at defending itself than, of course, Ukraine ever
I mean,
would be.
no two wars are comparable, but I'm just saying, you know, if Abhijit, you know, if that were to happen, I mean, obviously there's going to be down the line implications and consequences for us here in India. I mean, we've just had a standoff with the Chinese 5 years back. I don't think that's fully resolved or even fully resolvable, frankly.
True.
What happens to us?
Look, we will manage. I think, you know...
As we do in life.
Look, we're a jugaad culture. Our entire culture is, you know, things don't work.
Everything is an Indian wedding.
Nothing in India works. We manage, right? When we can't get used to the smoke, we claim that, you know, bacon is smoked, it increases the life of the pork, therefore the Delhi smoke is good for us. We're like mature maple smoked bacon, right? This is what we do. If America goes from strength to strength, we'll, we'll make that work. If America crashes and burns, we'll make that work. If Russia, wins the Ukraine war, we'll make that work. If Ukraine wins the Ukraine war, we will make that work as well. We have survived for 5,000 years, Zaka. We've hardly changed anything in our culture, including, our sanitation habits or anything like that. Why do you think these small events, even nuclear war is a small event in our civilizational trajectory? We make it work.
General?
Yeah, okay. I'll 2-3 things. First is, I think when you use force, apply force, commit yourself to a war which is unrelenting, like in Ukraine, your power diminishes. America had to pull out from Afghanistan because of its expenditure which took place in terms of economy, in terms of military hardware. Right, look at 2 things which has happened. Russians...
Just give me 1 second. These are live shots coming in from the Rashtrapati Bhavan. So this is where the ceremonial welcome will happen. You can see External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar. You can see India's ambassador to Russia by his side there. Of course, there's a conversation going on between the two of them. At 11 a.m. is when the ceremonial welcome will happen for the Russian president. Yes, General, continue.
So the thing is that India, unlike Ukraine, India is not a proxy of the West against China or this thing. India is a power by itself. We have got a major geographical advantage, right? People don't understand, like I have wargamed this 1,000 times, right? The geographical advantage which we have against China will deter China to do something silly, right? Because it just can't manage for a long term to do this thing. So one is about the American power diminishing because of expenditure of the equipment, money, funds. Second is, in case of Taiwan, which I will, tend to agree with you, NATO, European Union, I think he talked of 4 blocks, they have got virtually no love lost for Taiwan. Americans may have certain degree of commitment towards Taiwan, but Europe doesn't have, right? Europe has got more concerns about Russia and therefore they will like to egg a war against this thing. But Taiwan is going to be sold out by the Europeans if something happens. And with the diminishing power which America is today, China is on ascent. The distance which is there from American heartland to Taiwan makes it difficult today, right? I think it's a matter of concern, and till the time Japanese truly start pitching in and the people in the region start pitching in.
I mean, you look at the kind of flack and the blowback that the Japanese Prime Minister got just for saying that if China were to militarily attack Taiwan, there will be a response from Japan. I mean, she's been shut down.
But look, I think the problem Sanaichi Takai faced was she said out in public what was accepted in private.
Yeah.
Right? Because I can tell you whatever the Americans...
all the time.
Yeah, I do. I can tell you...
Nobody blows back on him.
I'm not a prime minister for good reason. Too much foot and mouth disease here. But look, the Japanese, I can tell you, and the Koreans are in absolutely no doubt in private that they will go and help Taiwan if necessary. They are, first of all, they're very confident that the Taiwanese can look after themselves. 100 kilometers of strait is not an easy logistical challenge to overcome. If you look at Japan, Japan's entire military posture now is moving towards area denial. It has always been sea denial, area denial. It is now moving towards long-range area and sea denial, especially sea denial. You look, they've got the biggest fleet of non-nuclear submarines, one of the biggest fleets of non-nuclear submarines around. What do you think is going to happen to all those Chinese invasion vessels while they're, trying to cross? Not easy. And the Japanese already have very well calibrated strategies. I suspect what America's plans have always been is that you first let Taiwan do its own thing, then Japan and Korea do, unrestricted submarine warfare, to take a World War II analogy. And then when required, America will come in. Remember, Taiwan is not Ukraine. Ukraine did not take its security seriously till 2014. Taiwan has always, Quemoy and Motsu have always, the 2 islands closest to China, have been under martial law for the longest time. They still have the draft out there, extremely well-trained troops, and they practice with virtually every NATO military that there is.
Okay.
They are nobody's fools.
Okay,
there is
quickly.
one distinct advantage, unfortunately, when you go into war, that China has. It's a dictatorship. It doesn't care how many of its own die in the trenches, millions. I mean, you had Mao, who's responsible for killing 63 million of his own people, 40 million in 4 years flat. But wars are strange things, strange beasts, if I may say. I mean, there was a time at the peak in Vietnam, US had deployed 3 million of its soldiers, and yet you remember what happened. They had to run away. At the same time, in Germany, the US troops at its peak were about 5 million, not, of course, more than what in Vietnam were, and they won the war. So it's very difficult to say what will happen, except to say that China does not care about casualties because it's a dictatorship.
Okay, we'll take a quick break. I think the ceremony will begin in the next 10 to 15 minutes, but we'll be right back in just a couple of minutes, and we'll get you live pictures again from the Rashtrapati Bhavan, where there will be the ceremonial welcome for President Vladimir Putin of Russia.
And the United States are natural allies. We are both democracies. India is the world's largest democracy. The United States is the world's oldest democracy. We are both multicultural, multiracial, multi-religious. But unfortunately, what was happening when India became independent was that the US was emphasizing either you are with us or you're against us. India wanted to pursue strategic autonomy. And that is why India became a major player in the non-aligned movement. Now, the United States misperceived it because, as I said, its view was either you are with us or you're against us. So non-alignment was perceived by the United States as hostile. That drove India towards Russia because the United States was strengthening its relations with Pakistan, including defense ties, which were being cultivated with dictatorships like that of General Ayub Khan. And all this was harming India. So India developed closer relationship with the Russians because it needed to offset the dangers which were developing on account of the Pakistan-US relationship. Now, let me carry on just by one or two other points. Mr. Rubin said that we must realize that Donald Trump is a lame duck president. How do we factor that in? It is for the American people to decide who is effective in their foreign policy establishment, who is not. He said we should reach out to Congress. The Congress has been powerless because these 50% tariffs which have been imposed in India and which are hurting our exports as also our economy have not happened with any sort of congressional intervention. As the president has done and the Congress has failed to do anything. So we have to factor in our own geopolitical independence and pursue strategic autonomy, which we are trying to do.
Ambassador, we hear you. Of course, I'm also now being joined by my colleague Siddhant Mishra, with us Akanksha Swaroop, Simran Babbar and Arun Dhanta. Thank you so much all for joining us. Simran, let me just come to you. Of course, there is going to be a focus on the strategic and privileged partnership here. We are potentially looking at a no-limits partnership between India and Russia. I'm sure you heard what our esteemed guests were also saying. How much of a factor do you think the United States is here? And what sort of breakthroughs are we expecting during this visit?
Well, absolutely, Hem. And in fact, starting on the very same point that you had earlier made about the United States in a series of first reactions that has come in, closely watching these developments and how exactly this entire relationship is coming to also unfold a new series of bilateral ties, and how New Delhi and Moscow are forging ahead to sign a host of pacts, specifically targeting, in fact, trade and defense. What really importantly also to be noted at this point is that on the same month in which Russian President Vladimir Putin has visited and decided to visit India, on December 25th, the 15-year anniversary on the adoption of the elevation of the Russia-India relations to the special and privileged partnership is also going to be celebrated. It is in fact going to be 25 years since Russian President Vladimir Putin first came to India for an annual summit with then Atal Bihari Vajpayee as the Prime Minister, and now where we stand is also a huge testament of how over these years, starting from the Soviet Union era as well, now the relationships have transformed themselves into the partnership that has stood the test of time. Very categorically also mentioning that not just this kind of a bilateral relations that has been elevated to the special and privileged partnership, but very importantly to be noted that the imports and the exports, which is going to be a very huge sector as bilateral pacts and the separate delegation level talks of the industry partners is also going to be taking place, as India is also hoping for Russia to import more. And in fact, even in this October as well, when a record $68.7 billion have been hit as a trade during even when the secondary tariffs were in place, this is also going to be a huge, in fact, roadmap for the 100 billion trade deal that has been set in place, and how that can also lead forward to these delegations that which will be coming into the shape.
All right, of course, that is something we will discuss further as well. Do stay on with me. Of course, there's lots to discuss here. Let's tell our viewers about the vehicle that Putin traveled in just for a little bit. The Orisinat, a fortress on wheels is what it's called, stretching over 5.5 meters in length, 2 meters in width, engineered to withstand the most extreme threats. The Orisinat offers VR8 to VR10 level ballistic
agreements, memorandum of cooperation between the All-Russian Public Organization Delovaya Rossiya, the All India Association of Industries and the World Center in Mumbai. So this is how an entire gamut of MOUs now, even Prasar Bharati and Gazprom Media Holding are going to be very actively part of this whole Ross Congress. There's an MOU enlisted over here with regards to that. Another MOU again involving the Gazprom Media Holding to be signed between NFDC and the Gazprom Media Holding as well. So two MOUs involving Gazprom. One even interestingly is going to be between TASS and Prasar Bharati. You also have Russian beverages, alcoholic beverage companies now coming to India. It's so this is the kind of diversification, Zaka, that the Commerce Minister Shri Piyush Goyal was highlighting yesterday when he was talking about how the bilateral trade has been up, but it needs diversification. It has been a bit lopsided, it has been a bit skewed, but when we are talking about how pivotal President Putin's state visit is, this is the kind of tectonic shift that we can look at, where India and Russia are making a big statement that they are not going to be trading against any particular country, but and that they are together and they are not in isolation. We are working towards an overall settlement which is also respecting the autonomy of both the countries and does not need a Western banking system in places.
Siddhant is also joining us. So I think both sides are stressing on the fact that, you know, the commercial side of the relationship, the economic and trade side of the relationship is something that will get a big boost this time around. What had been a government-to-government sort of relationship will now have a much more trade, commerce, and economic side that will be revealed today, or at least the attempt is to elevate that side. Walk us through, you know, Akanksha mentioned some of the deals that we can expect. Walk us through what the Indian side is stressing on as to how they, you know, how they figure they're going to circumvent the financial impediments with the banking system, the credit guarantee system, and so on. Yeah.
Well, yes, that's right, Zaka. In fact, the Indian side's focus is also on economic cooperation, more trade, investments, exports to Russia. But Zaka, you know, there has always been this issue after the war started in Ukraine. In fact, I remember my meeting with a Russian diplomat in New Delhi about a year back, and he explained to us the scenario at that time, that how Russia wants more and more big industry players in India to be investing in Russia. They are ready to give all kinds of subsidies and all kinds. They are ready to assess. But the whole problem here is that the Indian companies fear of getting sanctioned, because most of them have their offices in Europe, in United States. They do business there as well. So that has always been the concern with the major players in Indian markets in various fields. So how this particular concern will be addressed, because I was told that from last 2 days the business forums from both sides are meeting, the delegations are meeting, they are trying to plan, they are ready to, they are finding out solution for this. Also, Zaka, yesterday...
Siddhant, just give me a moment. I want to get a quick word from the studio as well. In terms of working around the sanctions, the financial sanctions that have been imposed, you think all of these agreements eventually will come to fruition because they have to find ways in which they don't get under the ambit of these Western sanctions?
I think they've all been planned very specifically in order to bypass those sanctions. Look, so far it hasn't come in the way at all. Like Anand said, we've used dirhams in the past. We're probably heading towards a rupee-ruble trade deal. I don't think India is too keen on that, though the Russians are keen, because right now the rupee is a much better reserve currency than the ruble is. But we're also heading most probably towards a gold reserve exchange. Remember, gold is, the price of gold has shot up very significantly. Given the kind of financial instability we're seeing. Today we're in the same position as we were in World War I, you know, where Britain disconnected its currency from the gold standard, made Germany pay an indemnity, fought the war with funds borrowed from America, and then American bankers had to give Germany loans so that it could pay its war indemnity, so that Britain could pay back America, which ultimately led to the Great Depression. You're looking at something like that. If you look at the government, it's been urging everyone to move away from speculation and towards mutual funds. Yeah. It's been focusing on gold a lot, as in, you know, they're almost short of telling you, please go buy gold. They're doing everything to see to it you buy gold and invest in mutual funds. So clearly, our financial planners have it right. They're looking at a long-term picture. We're most probably moving towards commodities because we're not as industrialized as, say, China. We can't do that much. But gold is something, you know, India, the Indian housewife has what, 6 times the amount of gold that the US Reserve does. Yeah. Some insane figure like that. Yeah. This is fine. This is an Indian market. Even if we can't industrialize, we can absorb gold big time. Gold and diamonds, no problem.
I don't think we need a nudge really from the government for our folks to buy gold. But very quick closing comments before the ceremony begins.
I think what I'm looking at is beyond the geopolitical maneuverings, beyond the oil purchase, because that's the most obvious. We've had a very stable relationship with Soviet Union and Russia as far as science is concerned. I'd like a real leg up on that. I mean, space is one thing, but very recently, you know, Mr. Putin announced this anti-cancer vaccine. The particulars aren't out yet, but I'm just thinking it's possibly to do with neoantigen, and you know, it's a new. I think we really need to thrash our heads together and move that forward at another level completely, because America is actually now the next part of sanctions would come related to H1B. So, you know, I think that's the area I'm looking at.
Very quickly.
I think we need to keep on focusing on reducing the $60 billion worth of trade deficit. How is it going to manifest? I think that is very, very important. Otherwise, the value of rupee in Russia is going to be zilch, because you may pump as much. That is one part. And second is, I think the sector which is being sanctioned today is tariffed as energy sector. Right. As long as we are able to diversify into other domains, I don't think there's going to be a challenge even in long term. But I'm very quickly looking at possibly this winter resolving all issues.
Okay, we'll see. We'll see. Will it be the winter of discontent, or will it be the winter of change? We'll leave it at that. Thank you very much to all our guests as we count down to the ceremonial welcome that President Putin will be receiving in about less than 10 minutes' time. That's going to be sharp at 11 a.m. President Rashtrapati Murmu will receive him. The Prime Minister will be there. And right after the reception, he goes straight to Rajghat. And at noon India time, the official delegation level talks begin and the official opening of the 23rd India-Russia Annual Summit. Continuing coverage right on the other side of this very quick break. Keep it right here on CNN News 18.
This is News 18 Network. India's largest news network.
But I also want to go across to Akanksha Swaroop, who's there at the Bharat Mandapam. Later this afternoon, both the President and the Prime Minister will be convening the India-Russia CEOs Roundtable, the Business Forum. And as I outlined a moment ago, one of the things that they want to expand is on trade and cooperation, on expanding the breadth of the trade relationship. Right now, a lot of it is Russian gas and oil, and the trade deficit, like I outlined a moment ago, is the second highest that India has with any country after China. How do they plan to go about it?
Right. So very interestingly, we are at the Bharat Mandapam where the CEO roundtable will be happening. And yesterday was the India-Russia Business Forum. Interestingly, Zaka, the Commerce Minister, Mr. Piyush Goyal, was very quick in pointing out that the trade has been flourishing between India and Russia. Nonetheless, it remains skewed, and that trade basket has to be diversified. So even though India happens to be one of the largest buyers of Russian defense, also was one of the largest buyers of Russian oil, and that of course has been going down. So it is now going to shift focus over to trade. What is that going to encompass? You're looking at pharmaceuticals, you're looking at fertilizers, agricultural products. Both the sides are looking towards working down, say, the tariff barriers. The Commerce Minister also highlighted that compliance, tariff, and there was a lot of red tapeism involved, which the Modi government has sort of worked towards to reduce, and that will also give a headway in sort of strengthening and deepening this partnership. All of the Russian delegation currently is comprising of, say, corporate honchos from these sectors, which I just enlisted, many of them also belonging to the energy sector, many of them belonging to big machinery sectors as well. The other aspect that we are looking towards is increasing labor mobility. Remember, Russia has lost out close to
Those are pictures, viewers, from Raisina Hill. The Prime Minister's cavalcade making its way to Rashtrapati Bhavan for the ceremonial welcome to President Vladimir Putin. As you know, the President of Russia landed yesterday at 7 o'clock in the national capital. He was received personally by Prime Minister Modi, a gesture that completely surprised and overwhelmed, in fact, the Russian delegates and, of course, Mr. Putin himself. Commentary to that effect was made public, thanking, in fact, the Prime Minister for his exceptional gesture of warmth and, of course, goodwill. Now, of course, viewers, the day will unfold in a barrage of meetings, declarations, agreements. There are huge expectations, and some of those expectations are set to redefine goals and targets and the very nature of the relationship with Russia. It is, of course, a long-standing relationship, viewers, that dates back decades, but it is going to be cemented and given a new direction, a reset, many people are calling it. Why? Because it will lead specifically to transformation in the nature of the association, making it more broad-based, making it more aligned to India's relationship with other powers like the United States that cover many, many different bases. So we're expecting cooperation, agreements, and all sorts of other joint cooperation in many fields besides the traditional energy and defense, which has dominated transaction between the two countries. Let's go straight across to Akanksha. Akanksha, this ceremonial reception will kick off the functions today Most of them, of course, will go into the business end. That's where it all begins today. Yesterday, a 3-hour, 40-minute meeting with Mr. Putin, private dinner, conversations. There's the Prime Minister draped in a shawl with the EAM next to him on his right. There's a big Russian delegation that has come through Akanksha. Just give us a shape of that and, of course, what is expected today.
Right. And the fact that President Putin is on his first state visit since the war began in Ukraine is speaking volumes of the kind of importance and mutual trust that these time-tested allies that Moscow and New Delhi share. The fact that Prime Minister broke away from protocol, went and received his very good friend right at the tarmac, the fact that they shared the car ride back to Prime Minister's residence, where he was also hosted to a private dinner, all of that combined with what we are going to be witnessing tonight, where President Srimati Draupadi Murmu will be hosting the Russian president to that state banquet. It all speaks volumes at a time when this is also making a statement to the wider West that India and Russia are not standing in isolation. They have a strategic autonomy. And as the Chinese state mouthpiece, Global Times, is already highlighting that this is also a statement to the West that we are looking towards multipolarity. This is India and Russia and, of course, perhaps even China in the backdrop. Remember, we all have to also refer to the optics of Tianjin. But having said that, yesterday, much of that bonhomie has already been going viral, Rahul. And today, action is not just going to be at the Rashtrapati Bhavan, but it will also be here where I am at the Bharat Mandapam, where the Ross Congress is taking place. Yesterday was the India-Russia Business Forum, which was also graced by the Russian delegation. And at the same time, India's Commerce Minister, who also emphasized on the need for diversification of the India-Russia trade basket, which is, of course, flourishing, but it is a tad bit skewed. And that's why today, just minutes ago, we broke that news about all the host of agreements that are currently taking place in Ross Congress, where I am currently as we speak. There are agreements. In fact, I can hear thunderous applauses over there as agreements are being signed. But let me quickly run our viewers through the entire gamut of these MOUs that are being signed today.
Just a minute, Akanksha, just a minute. Hold your thoughts on that. I'll come back to you. Action here, of course, at the Rashtrapati Bhavan. Ceremonial welcome at the forecourt of the Rashtrapati Bhavan. This is for most state dignitaries. I want to go across to Arun Dhanta. Arun, what are you picking up? I think I'm beginning to see cars coming in which might belong to the Russian delegation.
That's right, Rahul. And we've just seen the visuals of Prime Minister Modi entering into the Rashtrapati Bhavan through that route. This is the route that I can show you right now at this point. This is the Raisina Hills and Kartavya Path, through which in a short while from now you will be seeing the Russian President Vladimir Putin will be entering, and from Maurya Hotel, where he's staying, to Rashtrapati Bhavan, it will not take much time. Within 5 to 7 minutes you will be seeing, once he leaves from the hotel, to reach here. And then, of course, you will have that ceremonial welcome of Putin, which will officially mark the beginning of his state tour to India. Prime Minister Modi and the President, of course, are already inside. They will be, of course, welcoming. And then the Tri-Services Guard, the contingent of Tri-Services, Air Force, Army and Navy, they all are in formation inside the Rashtrapati Bhavan. And that's the highest honor that India can give to any state head, which will be reflected today in this visit of Vladimir Putin. In a short while from now, Rahul, we are expecting any moment that Vladimir Putin will be reaching here. And then, of course, that ceremonial welcome, because post that, of course, we will be seeing Vladimir Putin will be heading to Rajghat, and that will also show the cultural respect that he is giving to our country, of course, paying his tribute to Mahatma Gandhi at Rajghat. And then after that, he will straight away be heading to Hyderabad, the house for the bilateral meeting between Prime Minister Modi and Vladimir Putin. But here, where we are standing at Kartavya Path, all is set for Vladimir Putin's arrival. And in fact, inside visuals that we saw, that how Rashtrapati Bhavan's forecourt is completely decked up for this grand honor that Vladimir Putin is going to get. Tribe services formation contingent will be standing in the honor, and that is a reflection the kind of respect India is giving to Vladimir Putin. Rahul.
Yes, absolutely. Well, that, of course, was quite clear yesterday. Prime Minister's special gesture receiving, in fact, Vladimir Putin at the airport, surprising the Russian delegates and the delegation and the Russian government. It wasn't quite expected. The president was supposed to land at the airport and then travel to 7 LKM, but the Prime Minister upstaging all of those commitments by landing up at the airport, greeting the Russian president, and of course then traveling back with him in his modest car, quite frankly, to 7 LKM. And then, of course, viewers, there was that 3-hour, 40-minute long private engagement between the two. Exceeded expectations, to be quite honest. We're, of course, awaiting details about what really transpired so far. Very tight-lipped. But at the Ross Congress, there has been a lot of development. Akanksha was talking about that. I'll bring in Siddhant in just a few moments. But Akanksha, I just wanted a quick update from Rashtrapati Bhavan, but back to you. Lots of activity there where you are. A large number of agreements have already been inked. Just talk us through some of those.
Absolutely. And if I could, in fact, just request my video journalist, Arpit, to pan the camera a bit. We are at Ross Congress, and as you can see, there are members of the media fraternity and the Russian delegation all the way from Moscow. They've arrived over here, and inside that Audi here at the Bharat Mandapam is where the signing of all of those agreements is currently taking place, Rahul, as we speak. And so, as I was highlighting earlier, it's an entire gamut of sectors that we are looking at. There's the pharma sector, one of the agreements where it's being signed. You also have, interestingly, the media. There is an agreement between the Prasar Bharati and TASS. There's one between, say, even Gazprom Media Holding. So all of those areas have been covered in even, say, alcoholic beverage companies. And this is exactly the kind of diversification that India's Commerce Minister Shri Piyush Goyal has been talking about. He's, of course, acknowledged the fact that India and Russia bilateral trade has been flourishing, but it has been a bit lopsided. And that is what India and Russia are looking towards rectifying. I have been in touch with members of the Russian delegation. Many of them are corporate honchos from the pharma sector, from the agro sector, even fertilizers, and many of them also providing big machineries over here. They are looking to invest in India. Now, given that Russia has been deeply impacted by Western sanctions, so their banking sector has also been deeply impacted, which is why rewiring of the money pipes is extremely important if you talk about bringing in the rupee-ruble settlement. And that is something that has been going back all the way to the 1950s. But ever since the war in Ukraine began, Russian banking system has been heavily sanctioned. And so there has been this hesitation within Indian traders to invest in Russia and vice versa. So the rupee-ruble system, say the financial digital payment system where we will be linking it through RuPay, will ensure that there's a smooth transaction between both the countries.
Which will build
and there is no isolating,
more commercial
bridges of an
bridges.
anti-dollar bloc, which is what US was fearing.
Okay, just stay on with me. I want to bring in Tatiana Kukureva, senior journalist from Moscow. Tatiana Kukureva, thank you very much for joining us. Your quick initial overview of these understandings, these pacts, these agreements that have been signed. Quick comment on that before we cut back to Rashtrapati Bhavan.
Good morning to you, Rahul. Well, this, what we know so far of everything that has been signed and that everything that is still coming, we're looking at more diversification again within the trade between the two countries, which was in the works for quite some time now, obviously. It just so happened that in 2022, this relationship started to be dominated by trading oil. But there is a lot of room for diversification. We've been talking about it for quite some time, from pharmaceuticals to tech to nuclear to textiles, you name it, And from what I'm seeing, we're looking at these pictures from Rashtrapati Bhavan. From what I'm seeing, the Russian delegation, they're in very good mood. And, we're expecting for more to come, obviously, today from these meetings. It's going to be a packed day.
It's going to indeed. Yes, we're all awaiting, of course, President Putin's arrival. The camera is looking straight out to the gate, actually, and there's that whole bandobast, as they call it in India, ceremonial bandobast, waiting the arrival of President Putin. But let me quickly bring in Ross Feingold, former Asia chairman of the Republicans abroad from Taipei, Taiwan, who's looking at this from an American perspective, I presume. Mr. Feingold, all of this taking shape right under the nose or under a cloud, really, of American sanctions on India. We've been here before, of course, but how is America looking at this? What do you think is going to be the reaction in diplomatic circles in D.C.?
The interesting thing about your question is, there could be a variety of reactions in diplomatic circles, or, for example, by members of Congress, whether Republicans or Democrats. But ultimately, the only reaction that matters is President Trump and how he views this. Now, my own opinion is that President Trump very much wants to patch up relations with Prime Minister Modi and with India. It was such a strong relationship during President Trump's first term. There's so many shared interests between India and the United States that I think President Trump does want to reinvigorate that relationship and find a solution on tariffs and other issues. And frankly, the visit of Putin to India comes at a time when U.S. emissaries are meeting with Putin as well, and President Trump has clearly instructed his team to work hard on reaching some kind of peace agreement between Ukraine and Russia. So certainly there's going to be criticism in the United States about this, for sure. But will President Trump himself criticize this? Maybe not.
Well, that's interesting. Let me go straight across to Abhijit Iyer Mitra. Lots of activity this morning, barrage of agreements being signed, perhaps just the beginning of a lot more to come. How do you view this and, of course, the larger geopolitics around this?
Look, we needed a whole load of actual tangible deals, not just MOUs and things like that to come out of this. Because on one hand, Russia needed it to show that it's not isolated. We needed to show because, we've been under tremendous trade pressure from America with the tariffs and things like that. And we have to show we have options. If you remember the last time that Putin and Modi had a summit in China, it brought an instantaneous reaction from Trump, and he very significantly toned down his demands. Now, if just a speech or a handshake is able to produce those results, imagine what actual deals would produce. So I think that is what they're aiming for. It's a very carefully...
Are you expecting him to make a comment? Are you expecting him to make a comment at all?
I absolutely expect Trump to come out with something. Look, I've been watching on Twitter that a whole bunch of Europeans have been having their meltdowns. Now, Europe is full of sanctimonious humbug. They believe they drink too much of their own Kool-Aid or wine or whatever it is they have in Europe. The Americans tend to be more circumspect, but not Trump. Trump is very good in that he says what he thinks.
So when you say the Americans, you mean the establishment as a whole. That's what you're saying.
Trump is representing the establishment, yes.
Right, okay, wonderful. Let me open this up. Ashok Sajjanha, former diplomat, also joins us. Can a diplomat ever be a former diplomat? I don't think so, but let's go with that for a few moments. Mr. Sajjanha, good morning to you. What are we seeing here today? Are we seeing a reset? Are we seeing a recalibration? Are we seeing the beginning of a new axis? Not anti-West, non-West. Are we seeing perhaps Russia also beginning to deleverage a little bit from China, maybe? Looking at this as an opportunity? What are we seeing?
Yeah, thank you very much, Rahul, for having me. I don't think it's a reset. You know, as the Prime Minister himself said when Mr. Putin landed, that this is a time-tested partnership. And I think we need to be cognizant of that right from the 1950s. I could, in fact, even go before that. You know, whether it's Mahatma Gandhi, Leo Tolstoy, you know, our spiritual connect with Russia has been, you know, very long-standing, and with the Soviet Union. It has been there for a long, long time. But if you were to look at, you know, more contemporary times from 2000 onward, you know, when Putin just became from a prime minister, he became the president. And
yes, you can see the visuals of the Russian President Vladimir Putin entering the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The route you can see he's on Kartavya Path right now, entering, of course, towards the Rashtrapati Gate. You can see the entire convoy of the vehicles of Vladimir Putin. He's just entered. He's on Kartavya Path going towards Raisina Hill, and the next stop, of course, is the Rashtrapati Bhavan. The gate is opened there. The big gate is waiting for. You can see this convoy of Putin right now on your screens, and Prime Minister Modi and President Draupadi Murmu along with the External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar are already inside a red carpet welcome for Vladimir Putin here in the Rashtrapati Bhavan's forecourt, and this will mark the official beginning of his state visit to India. We've just seen the vehicles and the convoy of Vladimir Putin entering on Raisina Road, and now just enter the Rashtrapati Bhavan. These are the visuals that you can see of the convoy of, and in fact, a a motorcade was also accompanying this convoy, the car of Vladimir Putin, in which he is traveling, and then you will of course be seeing that ceremonial welcome for which Prime Minister Modi, President are already inside.
My colleague is sort of suggesting that this is going to now kick off the business end of the state visit. I just want to ask you, Mr. Sajjanhar, yesterday you had a 3-hour 40-minute meeting between the Prime Minister and President Putin. It's a private dinner. I'm sure they must have squared their sights.
No, absolutely. I definitely, you know, meaning, of course, you can say that, you know, it was a freewheeling discussion. There was no set agenda, etc. But of course, all the items are there in the minds of both the leaders, and they would have discussed them and they would have ticked them off. Okay, as far as S-400 is concerned, what is it? What are the possibilities? What can we do? What about S-500? You know, it has not been tried and tested. Of course, Russia is very interested in Su-57. That's a 4.5, fifth generation aircraft platform. What is it that, you know, how is India looking at it in terms of the mobility agreement?
So do you think they would have gone into all of these nitty-gritties?
Well, not the nitty-gritty, but the broad contours of what is possible as far as the two sides are concerned. You would remember, Rahul, you know, as far as mobility, because that is something that is coming on the agenda, in my view, for the first time, except for the initial discussion when Prime Minister Modi was the chief guest at the Vladivostok Far East Economic Summit that took place in 2019. At that time also it was thought that, you know, this huge long border that Russia has with China, and there is this possibility of, you know, some intrusions, some incursions, and you want Indians to come in. That time it started, and I think it is getting to fruition now. Okay. And I think it'll be taken forward in the agreements.
General Pandey?
Yeah, I think one of the very top agenda on the table would be possibly talking about Ukraine-Russia thing, which is how it is progressing, and the polarization which is taking place, and how maybe India may be able to leverage, or Russia may be able to use Indian position.
Do you think there would have been, those are the pictures that we're all waiting for. I'm sorry to have cut you off, General Saab. We'll pick up on that, Doctor. Look at these pictures, important pictures today, because the world is watching, isn't it? The world is watching, Doctor. The world is watching, the West is watching very closely. He's already said that Europe is having a meltdown. Trump will be waking up or going to sleep, and you know what happens in the late hours with Trump. He can get a bit twitchy on Twitter or whatever, Truth Social and so on and so forth.
You know, we've been walking on eggshells the last 70 years, been made to. I think time has come for us to make Trump walk on razor blades, which is what, as you said, when he wakes up, he's going to see these pictures. And I dare say, yes, General Saab is correct that there's a lot on the agenda. But ultimately, I think Modi would be whispering in Putin's ear, "बस सीधे कैमरे में देखते रहो, हंसते रहो, Trump सुनेगा."
Well, they did put on a show in Tianjin General, did they not? They put on a big show.
You know, like I like to go to a balanced view about Indian way of doing things. You know, we are not here possibly to excite others. Our this red carpet system has been put on for Xi, put on for Trump, has been put on for Putin every time he has come, and anybody else who has got a very special relationship.
Yeah, the Prime Minister made it clear this is not so against West or anti-West or anti-America. This is about
correct. But unfortunately, what happens is that people on the other side get excited about these this thing, and they draw unfair contextual arguments and stuff like that. I think when you look at what is happening in terms of tariff sanctions to us from the US or the European meltdown, possibly we like to see it from the perspective.
Well, that's that handshake this morning, viewers. There's already familiarity. They've already met, they've spoken, they've had a frank and free exchange. Someone said here on the panel, Mr. Putin is now going to, of course, inspect the guard in just a few moments. There's going to be a ceremonial welcome. Band will play, the tri-services band will play. We've already heard the gun salute. And that's the photo op, the mandatory photo op, before I think there's going to be some sort of yes, you wanted to make a point.
Because the good diplomat, sir, is here. You know, I'd like to maybe extract an opinion from him, because last couple of days has been really troubling as far as diplomacy is concerned. You've seen these hypocrite ambassadors, I have no other words or phrase to describe them, of UK, Germany. They've written that article without realizing the fact that their hypocrisy, you know, we also get internet out here. We can see what you guys are doing. You know, you not only were buying more Russian oil and energy than we were, and when you had the sanctions, tariffs slapped on us, not you, and then in order to nip us in the bud, when Trump slapped sanctions on the Russian oil majors, you got exemptions from Trump.
That's right.
You continue to buy oil.
I mean, look.
And you have the temerity to write that article here on Indian soil. I would like Sajanji to comment on that.